Professor X is remembered as the dreamer behind the X-Men, but Charles Xavier's dream always came with a cost. He built a school to protect young mutants, gave the X-Men their purpose, and trained them for the world that feared them, but also kept secrets, erased memories, and sent students into danger, and proved that even the noblest dream can leave a shadow behind. Welcome back, Panelheads. This is our Get to Know Hero Edition. Today we're breaking down where Professor X began, how he shaped mutant history, and why the man who built the X-Men is not always the hero people think he is. Charles Xavier begins in the X-Men issue 1 as the founder of the X-Men and the headmaster of Xavier's school of gifted youngsters. On the surface, the setup is simple. 5 young mutants, Cyclops, Marvel Girl, Beast, Angel, and Iceman, trained by a powerful telepath who wants them to protect a world that does not understand them. But even in the first issue, Xavier's dream is not passive. He's not just teaching the students how to control their powers. He's preparing them for conflict, shaping them into a team, and sending teenagers into a field against Magneto before the world even knows what the X-Men really are. The school is a refuge, but is also a training ground, and that tension is built around Professor X from the start. One of the darker details of Professor X's history is that his first major psychic battle happened before he was even born. In New X-Men, Charles Xavier revealed he had a twin sister named Cassandra Nova. She was described as a dangerous, unnatural psychic presence forming alongside him in the womb. Charles sensed what she was before anyone else could. His mutant telepathy awakened early, and he struck back on instinct, attacking Cassandra before birth and causing their mother to miscarry. For years, Cassandra was believed to be gone, but she survived. Not as a fully formed child, but as a mass of living cells that rebuilt itself, growing into a body and returning years later with a brutal hatred for Charles Xavier and everything he built. Professor X is one of the most powerful telepaths in Marvel Universe. He can read minds, project thoughts, communicate great distances, create psychic illusions, influence memories, and enter mental battles on an astral plane. Cerebro first appeared in X-Men issue 7, expanding that reach even further, turning Xavier's gift into a global tool for finding mutants. But Xavier's greatest weapon is not only his telepathy, it's the ability to find people before they understand what they can become, then push them towards a greater purpose than themselves. That can be inspiring when it gives lost mutants a home. It becomes far more uncomfortable when the same gift lets him enter the most private part of a person and change the way they understand reality. Every time Charles chooses restraint, the dream feels noble. Every time he crosses a line, the damage feels personal. The most important relationship for Xavier's story is his bond with Magneto. Their conflict is not just a hero versus villain. It's just two men looking at the same hatred and reaching different conclusions. Xavier believes coexistence is still possible. Magneto believes survival requires power first. Their debate becomes the spine of the X-Men mythos and gives Charles his clearest mirror. Magneto is the friend who understands the dream, but also the enemy who keeps asking if the dream is too fragile to survive the real world. Cyclops is another key relationship for Charles, because Scott Summers becomes the product of Xavier's training. Charles takes a young mutant who cannot fully control his power and turns him into the X-Men's field leader. But over time, Scott becomes one of the strongest arguments against Xavier's methods. He learns discipline from Charles, but he also learns how heavy leadership becomes when the dream keeps demanding sacrifice, making Scott more than Xavier's student. He becomes the person who carries Xavier's lesson long enough to question it. Jean Grey hits in a different way, though. Xavier helps one of the most powerful telepaths in mutant history, but Jean's story also shows the danger of holding too much power too quietly. Their connection begins as mentorship, but it grows into something more complicated as Jean becomes powerful enough to move beyond the limits Charles imagined for her. Jean's growth eventually proves something Xavier cannot fully control. The students he shapes will not always remain inside the roles he built for them. Cassandra Nova is the darker reflection of Charles, introduced in New X-Men issue 111. Cassandra is tied directly to Xavier and becomes one of the most disturbing threats in modern X-Men history. Her attack on Genosha pushes the X-Men into one of their darkest eras, and her connection to Charles makes the conflict feel almost mythic. She is not just another enemy attacking the mutants from the outside. She is the nightmare attached to Xavier's own existence. And then there's the Shadow King, one of Xavier's most powerful psychic enemies. Their battles are not about strength in the usual sense. They are wars over minds, influence, corruption, and control. For Xavier, the Shadow King represents what psychic power looks like when compassion completely disappears. That makes him more than a run-of-the-mill villain. He is a warning of what Charles could become if the dream ever lost its moral center. Kane Marco is not a physical threat crashing through X-Men's history. He's Xavier's family history turned into something unstoppable. Their rivalry shows that Charles was shaped by pain and resentment long before he became the calm voice inside the mansion. Every time Juggernaut returns, he brings the past with him, and that makes him one of Xavier's most personal enemies. In the Onslaught era, Xavier's dream turns inward and becomes something much more dangerous. After Magneto violently removes Wolverine's adamantium in X-Men issue 25, Charles crosses one of his biggest moral lines by shutting Magneto's mind down completely. But that choice does not disappear. It helps create Onslaught, a psychic threat born from Xavier's repressed darkness and Magneto's rage. For a character built around restraint, Onslaught exposes the danger Xavier keeps buried. His greatest enemy is not always outside the mansion. Sometimes, it's the damage left behind when a man with good intentions decides he has the right to control another mind. In New X-Men, Xavier is pushed into a modern mutant world that is bigger, stranger, and more exposed than before. The public expansion of mutant identity forces Xavier's dream into the open in a way earlier stories only hinted at. The mansion is no longer just a hidden school. It becomes part of a larger cultural conflict, and Charles has to face what happens when the world cannot ignore mutants anymore. In animation, Professor X becomes one of the most defining voices of the X-Men through X-Men, the animated series. That version leaned into the classic image of Xavier as the wise mentor, but the show also understood that his dream works best when it is tested. X-Men 97 continues that legacy by showing how much the team still lives in the shadow of Xavier's vision, even when he's not always standing beside them. Together, both series makes Charles feel less like a simple teacher and more like the dream the X-Men keeps fighting to protect, question, and carry forward. In live action, Patrick Stewart's Professor X made the character feel iconic for an entire generation of moviegoers. The first X-Men film in 2000 presents him as a calm, gentle, and morally steadfast, especially opposite to Ian McKellen's Magneto. James McAvoy's younger Charles in The X-Men First Class gave the role a different energy by showing him before he became the professor everyone knows. But Stewart's return in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and his confirmed return in Avengers Doomsday proves his Xavier is still the version Marvel reaches for when it wants the X-Men legacy to feel real. In video games, X-Men Legends and X-Men Legends 2 Rise of Apocalypse show Professor X is more than just the mind in the chair. He still guides the team and holds the X-Men together, but both games also allow his psychic power to become part of the action. For modern comics, in the From the Ashes era, Charles Xavier's story moves into one of the lowest points. After the fall of Krakoa, the former Xavier Institute becomes the Grey Malkin prison, and Xavier is imprisoned there after surrendering himself for the crimes against humanity. Then X-Men Hunt pushes that even further, with Xavier breaking out of Grey Malkin and becoming a fugitive while different X-teams are pulled into the hunt. Professor X is not simply a good man with a dream. He's a teacher who built a home, a leader who led an army, and a dreamer who learned how dangerous hope can become when one person controls too much of that path. So Panelheads, which version of Professor X hits the hardest for you? The classic animated mentor? The Patrick Stewart's movie version? Or the Krakoa era Xavier who helped build a mutant nation? Drop your comments down below. And if I brought up a detail you didn't know, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with another comic book fan. Let's keep building this Panelhead community together. Other than that, Panelheads, we'll see you again when we cover one of our favorite comic book heroes from over the years.